Welcome to Discograffiti, the Music Obsessives podcast that gives freaks like you and me the chance to connect with the brotherhood obsessed with rating the entire discography of every single artist and band that ever mattered. I'm your host, Dave Gebro, and with 4 new episodes each week, you're going to gain a comprehensive knowledge of an act's history and output in the time it takes to listen to one album. Each new guest swings a hard left into an area you either had no idea you needed to know about or know all about and can't believe you're not alone out there. And in this episode, we'll be turning our spray cans on Jefferson Airplane, along with our special guest, Jorma Kaukonen. Coming up, we've got an interview with Lenny Waronker, all the living members of Moby Grape rating their own catalog, Denny Tedesco on his incredible new documentary, The Immediate Family, an unprecedentedly intimate interview with Marilyn Wilson Rutherford and her cousin and Honey's bandmate Ginger Blake, plus Season 3 of the Beach Boys and Your Dreams Come True series, which will absolutely, without question, delve deeper into Pet Sounds and Smile than anyone else ever has in history. Plus, Crosby and Nash's complete discography, discussed and rated by the man himself, Graham Nash. So don't miss out. Open up your listening app right now and subscribe. And away we go then! Today's guest spent a hobo's paradise of a childhood in Pakistan, the Philippines, and Washington, D.C., which gave him the prerequisite life experience to be able to optimize a crossing of the paths with Jack Casady as a teen. The two of them formed a band called The Triumphs, with our guest on rhythm and Casady on lead. Since that time, man, what a life. He's played as a folky solo act in coffee houses, taped a legendary 1964 performance with Janis Joplin on vocals and his first wife on typewriter, handled lead guitar duties for Jefferson Airplane, spun off into Hot Tuna with Jack when the Airplane hit the 1970s, and found himself as bandmates with the almighty Jaco Pastorius in the 1980s. But most importantly, he got and stayed sober so he could live to tell us all about it in his 2018 autobiography, Been So Long, My Life in Music. And it's been 29 years of clean living at this point. Lads and ladies of Discograffitiville, I used to live in San Francisco's Richmond district, and almost every single day I would take the bus up Fulton Street, and there wasn't a single instance where my heart didn't skip a few beats when zipping by the old Airplane house at 2400 Fulton Street. There's no place in the world I'd have rather squatted in my entire life. Whether flying high in the Airplane, blues deep diving in Hot Tuna, or painting some beautiful tunes on a solo canvas, this man makes damn good music, every last note of it straight from the heart. One of my all-time favorites of the Bay Area folk and psych scene. He is the light of this world. So would you please let us get together right down here with Jorma Kaukonen?
Yay! Well done.
This is an honor.
Well, thanks, man. It's, at this point in my life, it's an honor when anybody remembers any of that stuff that we did.
I don't think there's a single guise through which you've passed that is not illustrious enough to stop and talk about, honestly.
I've been lucky. I've been in the right place at times, and I came of age in an interesting time also.
You sure did. And, before we dive right into it, usually the plugging comes at the end, but This time I want to flip it because, you're involved in something that really is worth talking about here, and I want to talk about that first. So let's first talk about the Hudson River Music Festival. This is happening this Saturday, June 14th, Croton Point Park, Croton, New York. In the late 1960s, Pete Seeger and his wife Tashi, they envisioned an outdoor music festival on the shores of the Hudson River. They wanted to bring people to the river to appreciate its beauty and become part of a movement to clean it up. So for over 50 years now, their vision's been turned into a reality, thankfully, as the Hudson River Music Festival. Tell me about some of your thoughts about being included in the lineup.
So check this out. So a number of years ago, and I'm really horrible with dates, so this is something that you can look up, I'm sure. But I was at 2 of those festivals when Pete was still alive. And last year sometime, there's a great documentary about Pete and Toshi and the whole gang working on Clam Theater called Down by the Riverside. That's an awesome movie, and they showed it in this little college town where I live in Athens, and I got to do an introduction to the movie because I'm kind of like, the local guy that has somewhat national visibility, and I'd actually met Pete Seeger. So Pete and Toshi, just unbelievable story. Pete was so influential to me when I was a kid coming up, and I remember that he played in D.C., probably the Listener Auditorium. I wasn't even really playing the guitar yet. I was just messing around, and my father took me to see him, and I made him take me backstage and made Pete show me his finger picks. Anyway, so I got a chance to hang with Pete a little bit. Again, it's a number of years. I couldn't tell you exactly where it was. But just the energy of what happens at this festival is incredible. And also, I know you probably know the history better than myself, but the Hudson River was practically a dead river when they started working on it. And that's not the case anymore. It's unbelievable. So to be a part of this festival again, after a number of years, it's really an honor. And also we can thank Pete and the gang for the Clean Water Act too.
Right. And so this is not just a concert. This is truly it's a hub for local community activism. Plus, there's music for kids and families. There's a rock and roll playhouse, all kinds of different setups within the festival itself. And so for more information and to get tickets, and I would hurry up and grab them fast, because again, it's coming up this Saturday. Go to HudsonRiverMusicFestival.com. Admission is free for children 12 and under, which is another boon to go there. Again, that's HudsonRiverMusicFestival.com.
Yeah, man, it's going to be a fantastic event. A lot of super great performers. It's such an honor to be there with all these guys. And also, I'm going to be bringing my buddy John Hurlbut with me. We've known each other for 40 years. And during the pandemic, when everybody was shut down, when we had nothing else to do, we made a couple records together. So I'll be doing the Jorma show, of course. Then my buddy Johnny will come in at the end of the set, and we'll do a bunch of cool stuff together. Johnny's awesome. And I just was told yesterday, I got a message through my people that Steve Earle, who's another old buddy of mine, has asked me to sit in with him. And so it's going to be a blast.
That is awesome. Right. Steve Earle, Tom Chapin, Madison Cunningham. Go on to HudsonRiverMusicFestival.com and check out the lineup. It's definitely going to be an amazing event. Now let's go all the way back, please. I would like to know what, if any, if you could target one flashpoint moment of creative epiphany, your holy shit moment where everything came together in a flash and you knew what you were going to be doing for the rest of your life.
That's a good question. And I would have to say in 1960 when my mentor, Ian Buchanan, taught me how to fingerpick, and when that door began to open for me, and mind you, it's not like I burst out of the creative womb able to do all this stuff like everybody else. I didn't know anything about this kind of stuff. But, when I saw Ian play, we were at Antioch College together, and for some unknown reason, he took me under his wing. When that door opened, I realized, this is really what I want to do. Now, I will say, didn't help my college grades very much because I kind of quit doing everything but playing the guitar. But when people ask about Antioch College, they go, Antioch had this work-study program where you do a quarter and then you go work somewhere, et cetera, et cetera. So after my summer job at this hospital in New York City, I didn't get thrown out of Antioch College, but I was not encouraged to return. But I learned what has defined my life, which is fingerstyle guitar at Antioch College. So what more can you want from an institution?
True. So, a couple of years after that holy shit moment in 1960, you had the great good fortune to meet Paul Kantner at Santa Clara University.
Sure, and that's just a complete quirk of fate. So when I was not encouraged to return to Antioch, I rejoined my family. My father was a Foreign Service officer. My family lived in the Philippines. And while I was there, I spent a year at a Jesuit school called the Ateneo de Manila. And when I was coming back to the United States, a lot of these very odd credits that only other Catholic schools accept, I wanted to go to the University of San Francisco because, hey, it was San Francisco. My grades weren't good enough for that, but I got into Santa Clara. And kind of funny because Santa Clara, very conservative Catholic school, was the first year, it was co-ed. It was weird for me because I'd kind of been out in the world for a bit. But sometime within the first week that I was there, I ran into this guy. I was walking across the campus, and I saw this bearded, sort of semi-long-haired guy, which was really weird back then. This is way before any of us had long hair. Anyway, and his name was Bob Kinsey, and he and I became friends immediately. And he said, "There's this guy you got to meet." And that guy was Paul Cantor, who had been at Santa Clara the year before but dropped out. And so my buddy Bob, we drove down to Santa Cruz. I remember well, in his 57 Ford, he had a surfboard sticking out of the trunk. It was real California stuff. And we got down to Santa Cruz, and down on the beach there was like a surfer shack, and there was Paul Cantor sitting in front of the house playing the 12-string guitar.
Now, were either of you guys revolutionaries in training, up against the wall motherfucker types, or did that come way later?
I would have to say no. I think that most of us were interested in... was just interested in the art of the music. I'm not saying that I was apolitical, because we're all political, Yeah. But I certainly wasn't the rabble rouser that some of my compatriots, God bless them, were, But it was that time. In a normal world, I'd be a great grandfather, but in this one, I've got a 19-year-old daughter that's in college, and we talk about some of this stuff, and I go, look, I'm not saying my time was better than yours, because it wasn't. It was just my time. But there was there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, but in that time we thought we could make a difference, and I'm not sure that's the case anymore.
Look, your time is objectively better than this time. I got robbed. When I was like 12 years old, I used to watch Gimme Shelter, even Gimme Shelter. Sure. I wanted to be there even. I would have settled for Altamont.
Right, no, I get it, I do.
I was born in 72, and nothing compares to what you guys went through. But in 63, you had already written Embryonic Journey. So as far as I'm concerned, you weren't finding your way. You kind of had already gotten there.
In a sense. But I need, if we're going to a brief discussion on the creative process, because, when we say, I wrote this and that, it almost seems like an architected thing, and there's a lot of ways to be creative. I remember when that song came to me. I was still at Santa Clara, and I was doing a guitar workshop, and I had just learned the drop D tuning. The guitar players know what it is. 6 strings down to a D, and it was just such a full and warm sound. And just messing around with it with a finger-picking pattern, what almost was Embryonic Journey at that time evolved. And my roommate at the time said, that's a song, you ought to finish that, and I did. So it was a gift from the creative gods in a lot of ways, but I paid attention, didn't let it get away.
But from 1963 to Surrealistic Pillow, 4 years later, did you just keep it in your pocket? What was the idea? What was its journey to Surrealistic Pillow?
So before I got in before the Jefferson airplane made it possible for you and me to have this conversation today, in a lot of ways, I was a moderately successful local, folk guitar performer. For example, Paul and I lived in San Jose. Paul moved to San Francisco when the airplane started, of course. My friend Tom Hobson was in San Francisco. Jerry Garcia was in Palo Alto. A bunch of guys in Berkeley. And Janis was in San Francisco. So we all kind of had our regional things, because none of us had cars back then in the day, so you didn't really get around a lot. But as I said, I already had sort of like a regional identity. So I never let that go. Because even in the beginning of the airplane, when we started rehearsing once the airplane started gigging, that was it. That's all I did. But I remember with the first rehearsal in the summer before we opened on Friday the 13th of August, I was still going down to San Jose to play at the coffee houses there.
All right, so tell me about the shelter.
So there were two places there that we played. One was the offstage. And Paul Cantor and David Freiberg and Paul Foster, who was a merry prankster, and a bunch of those people ran the offstage. That was kind of like our home place. And I had another friend named, and this dovetails to this earlier conversation we had about the airplane house. There was a guy named Paul Ziegler, as a local guitar player that became a friend of mine. And he was an Army vet. He had been an airborne ranger, and he wound up being a folkie in San Jose. And he started the shelter. And his ex-wife, Catherine, owns the Airplane House today. How about that for the way
Wow.
things work out?
Wow. That's crazy. I wish I was around when it was black and gold. It's white now, isn't it?
How could they ruin it?
I know, seriously. So before a few months ago, I had never heard of Weird Herald. Now,
Sure.
it's come to my attention that you were shipped a copy of the Weird Herald release, which came out a few months ago.
Right.
It was shipped to the Fur Peace Ranch address.
I got it.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you've heard that material prior to just when it recently came out.
Not since I heard them live, no.
Holy shit. It's an
I know.
it's a revelation.
So they were a great band. And, Billy Dean was an interesting character. Like I said, it didn't have his story didn't have a happy ending, but he was one of these guys who was incredibly dynamic, was a really great guitar player. Sad to say he had some substance abuse problems, which ultimately took his life. But he was one of these guys, Weird Herald, to see them play. And I mean, they would have been a great band even if they'd had an average lead guitar player.
By the way, I have an episode coming up. The whole thing's about Weird Herald. It's about their history, and it's with Cam Cobb.
Oh, he did the book. Yeah, he did. Right. Yes. Speaking of podcasts and stuff, I wanted to turn you on to our podcast. My buddy John Hurlbut and I do a podcast. It's called Roads and Roads. It's on Fur Peace TV, YouTube channel called Fur Peace TV.
And the
Okay.
next one, which airs the third Saturday in June, is all about protest songs.
Yeah, the third Saturday in June is our. We've already taped it, obviously.
Sure.
But anyhow, yeah. So I love podcasts. They're awesome.
By the way, you're going to think I'm nuts. I do 4 shows a week. And I did an episode like this with Graham Nash about the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. And since he decided, you know what? I want you to go over everything I've ever done. So he's doing the longest interview he's ever done. It's going to probably be longer than 30 to 35 hours of
That's
everything
awesome.
he's ever done. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, man.
And by the way, just to put this in your back pocket, I have always wanted to do this with you, Jack, and Grace about the airplane.
Well, here's the good news. It's still possible.
I'm
We're still
telling you
alive.
that this is a dream of mine, and I would do anything to make that happen.
Sure. Cash it our publicist, and she can make that happen. That'd be awesome. That'd be a lot
I
of
love
fun.
that. The kind of research that I put into this, I basically, I have stopped my life to do this show. And so it's got to be perfect or it's no go. It's got to be like as granular as is humanly possible. So enough about that. We'll definitely revisit that topic. But
I'll say just another thing too.
Yeah.
Jampol Management. That's Jampol. Jeff Jampol.
For Grace.
If you want to get a hold of Grace, that's the way to do it.
I already did get a hold of them.
Cool.
So I already have spoken with David over there regarding.
Oh yeah. Okay, you're on top of all this stuff.
And you can take over my show. I would want it that way. It would just be it would be the Jorma show for however long it is. So Billy Dean Andrus, and then you meet Skip Spence at the same time.
Sure. So Skip, when I first met Skip, I was teaching guitar at the Benner Music Company and playing the folk gigs that we all had, and still going to school. And when I first met Skip, I think he was working at a Levitt's furniture store, But you never know what destiny turns on a dime, and you never know when your life is going to take an amazing turn. I mean, Skip was always brilliant, Yeah, another story that doesn't have a happy ending either, but he was so incredibly talented and just like a delightful human being, and Skip's story. So some amazing people came out of the South Bay.
And Herb Peterson, we left out, and David Freiberg.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, some insanely talented people.
Yeah.
And so, I love this idea. You're a self-described country blues purist, and you're invited to jam with this new band,
Right.
but you're kind of reluctant to join in. But then you are faced with a tape delay device that's part of a sound system that was used by Kesey for the acid test parties. What happened?
So, yeah, I mean, again, destiny turns on a dime. Yeah, I was pretty full of myself there. And, and I was it was so important for me to be authentic, whatever being authentic meant, not realizing that what we would get into, nothing could be more authentic than the music scene in San Francisco. But anyway, so I was like moderately, like I said, I was really full of myself and moderately disdainful of all this stuff. But Paul said, "Come on up, but there's a good bunch of folks. It'll be fun. Check it out." And Kesey had this Echoplex there Now, you know, because of the way technology is advanced, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, there are guitar pedals that can do your income tax for you. I mean, it's amazing, all this kind of stuff, but none of that stuff really existed back then. So to hear what this tape delay gadget could do, it was like, whoa, what universe is this coming from? And we're just messing around, and in that moment, it just thought, you know, I don't think I thought about it in these terms at the time, but looking back on it, I realized I was in the right place at the right time.
Right. And you know what's interesting about looking back at all that, and I've thought myself into like a million rabbit holes about this. That time, you know, without having lived it, I mean, I lived on the hate later on in the mid 90s, you know, just to recapture a tiny slice of whatever the hell might have happened, you know, decades after the fact. But you guys were in, you know, a life experiment where you were really assimilating into the present moment. And when that happens, you don't realize you're making history because,
no, of course not. No.
Because it's all about right now. So, you know, you have things happening like the way that Skip met Marty Ballin. He just happens upon John Cipollina and Freiberg, and they, you know, he and Quicksilver jam at the Matrix. Marty makes him the drummer. All these things happening that seem impossible. You know, and, you know, all this technology, this acid-drenched technology that you were so enamored with, at that time, Jefferson Airplane was not a psychedelic unit. You guys were basically proto-hippies.
San Francisco at that time, it was one of these anything is possible kind of cities. First of all, it was a very charming city. The tallest building we moved there was probably only 8 stories tall. I mean, it was still a small town. And here's a thought, here's something to wrap your mind around. It was a cheap place to live. California as a state in that time was very conservative. Jerry Brown's father, Edmund G. Pat Brown, was the governor. Mayor Shelley was the mayor of San Francisco. Very conservative guys, you know. So it's not like it was not like an open city, just waiting to embrace stuff like that. But the amazing thing is, because of the creative energy, and not just for music too, think of all the poets, the beat poets and the artists, graphic artists, all that kind of stuff. There's such an amazing creative energy there that the very conservative establishment allowed us to blossom. I don't think they were happy about it. They didn't support us, don't get me wrong. But it did happen, and they let it happen. Right. We had to fight for it a lot of the times, but it happened.
It must have felt weird because, you know, especially for a guy who is coming toward it from a blues perspective, you all of a sudden, kind of almost overnight, are treated like royalty. I mean, you know, not just in San Francisco, but especially as it turns to 67, you are being feted in a big way.
Absolutely. So we can certainly thank Ralph Gleason for that. He was a columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, and he was one of these guys that was very respected. It's kind of funny because he died young. I'm probably like 30 years older than him now than he was when he passed away. But he seemed like an old man to us at the time. But he was a hip old man. And he came down. He was a music critic and wrote about this and that. And he came down and listened to the Airplane. There's something in what we were doing that built a fire in him. And he wrote about it in his column. And a lot of people that started to take us seriously that probably would not have taken us seriously or would have taken longer had they not read that article in the Chronicle, which was a conservative paper at that time.
Plus, it didn't hurt that, you know, Bill Graham, of all people, took a vested interest in you.
Oh, listen, absolutely not. I mean, again, you know, me and my friends, we're the luckiest people alive, really, the way things worked out for us. You know, we had, you know, Matthew Cates was our first manager. He was a sort of a shady character in a lot of ways, but to give credit where credit's due, he got us our first record deal and stuff like that. I mean, you know, most bands and stuff like that will spend a lifetime trying to get a recording deal, never get one.
Yeah.
We had one handed to us on a platter. How often does that happen?
Not only that, but you actually turned down 6 or 7 companies too before signing with RCA. Yeah,
that's correct. Yeah, we got rushed by a lot of people, and you know, again, you know, having been around for a couple of 24 hours and looking back on it, it's like, how could this happen? But it did.
Yeah, it's funny that you so congenially referred to Matthew Cates as sort of a shady character. This is the biggest bastard that's ever walked the face of the earth.
There's bigger ones, but now let's not get into politics right
Okay,
now.
yeah, he's the second biggest one.
Yeah, he was, you know, but the thing was, Yeah, it's kind of funny looking back at it because he was a crook. He was a crook. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah.
But somehow he got over. And again, to give credit where credit's due, he did open some doors for us, and then we escaped from him.
Do you remember how he became your manager?
I think Marty discovered him or brought him around. Yeah, we'll blame Marty for this.
No. I mean, the actual reason he enticed you guys by mentioning that he had access to an
unrecorded Dylan songs. Yes, you're right.
Lay Down Your Weary Tune, which only became an outtake. It wasn't even released by you guys. And
that's hilarious.
Yeah, I know. So the weird thing is, the cause and effect of it is when you guys let him go, and then, of course, Moby Grape happened and whatnot, he fucked those guys so badly because he had PTSD from, quote unquote, being dealt a bad hand by Jefferson Airplane.
Oh my.
Exactly.
Hey, think about how badly he fucked David LaFlame's band.
It's a beautiful day.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful day. Yeah.
In fact, do you know what Whitebird is about?
No, actually, I don't.
He left them in an attic room in a house in Seattle without food, without anything. And they wrote that about being caged up with no one to talk to, no food to eat, nothing. That's about the Cates experience.
Oh, I believe that story. David, may rest in peace, came and played our Fur Peach Ranch before he passed away, and we had a couple chuckles about that. But even this late in life, because this is only like, I don't know, within the last decade, hard to remember. But they still had problems, leftover problems with publishing legality that Matthew left them.
So was there anything that haunted you up until, you escaped his clutches? Because I think the legal battle with the Airplane lasted until 1987.
Yeah, it did. And cost, I don't have a true figure here, but cost much, if not almost all of the royalties we made up to that time for legal expenses and stuff.
Jordan Barnes from the Moby Grape group on Facebook asks, at the time, what did you think when you'd heard that Skip had joined forces with Cates to form Moby Grape?
Well, I knew that whatever Skip was, because Skip was such a huge talent, I just thought, I'm not a business guy. I know a little bit more about it now than I did then. But back then, I really knew nothing about it. It just seemed, based on our experience, that it was not going to be a good idea.
Yeah. You know what I'm so curious about? And I think about all the time, probably disproportionately so. January 14th, 1967, the Human Be-In. Tell me what that was like, because that was the first of its kind. And I know you played it alongside The Dead and Quicksilver. Tell me what that really felt like, if you can relocate yourself there and sort of pierce through the filters of time.
Sure. So, as an entree to this question, so I guess they've got another Hardly Strictly Bluegrass coming up in San Francisco or something like that, and they're talking about all the stuff they have to do, porta potties and the security and all the money and all the stuff. You think back, like when we got together on Golden Gate, at the Polo Fields, with the Grateful Dead and all those guys, we just showed up with a truck and a sound system, and we all did that for free. And who knows how, you probably know the stats better than me, but there were hundreds of thousands of people showed up.
Bill Graham became your manager that month. Things were just starting to take off for you. Plus, you saw a massive cultural shift.
Sure. So at some point, we need to discuss the Woodstock thing. Yeah. Because to me, the most important thing, Woodstock is one of those iconic festivals, even though it was a sloppy pain in the ass to actually be there. But it's more important than that, because in that moment, all of us realized that in this country, there was an us, guys of my generation, and there was a them. And that was really important. I mean, what do I know about what young people think today, But I'm not sure that there's that same kind of self-identity on a massive scale.
There's not.
Yeah.
There's not. There just isn't. It sucks. It really does. And I don't count myself as the young people of today. I'm 53, but I'm Gen X, and we didn't really have much of an identity, and there's even less of one now.
Right.
But you were the only band ever that performed at Monterey, Woodstock, and Altamont, and the first Isle of Wight festival.
We did. That's true.
I'm curious what the biggest cultural shifts were that you felt at all four of those happenings. I know that Paul recalled Woodstock favorably, but Grace and Spencer didn't. So are people looking at this through the passage of time, in a skewed way? And, was it something different than what it was, or was it all that was cracked up to be?
I think there's probably never going to, they have large festivals and festivals that are that big, but none of them are going to be a zeitgeist like Woodstock was, in my humble opinion. We were there for a long time at Woodstock.
Were you tripping, or was it just great?
No, God, no. That would have been horrible. I can count on one hand the times I've taken acid. That wasn't my drug of choice.
Really? Okay.
I think it was important in a lot of ways, in a shamanistic kind of way, to see that experience.
What was your drug of choice? Do you mind me asking? Oh, hi. I'm Dave Gebrow. I threw my career as a licensed hearing instrument specialist in the trash, sold my house, and moved to the East Coast with my wife and 5-year-old son in order to focus on making the ultimate weekly podcast for music obsessives thrive. But weekly wasn't enough for me, so I bumped it up to 4 shows a week. Becoming a subscriber to Discograffiti's Patreon gives you access to hundreds of exclusive episodes. As a 2-show-per-week private, you get the weekly show by and for our Patreon family, the Discograffiti Soldiers of Sound podcast. As a 3-show-a-week lieutenant, you'll get early release, ad-free, extended director's cuts of the main show. They're the shows as they were intended to be heard. Plus, you'll gain access to half the Patreon archive and the upcoming Beach Boys Behind the Mirror companion episodes, which will feature dozens of special guests from within the Beach Boys camp talking about and rating their music. But as a 4-show-per-week major, you'll be drowning in a flood of must-hear binge listening, because I'll be bombarding you with episodes about super cool bands that are too subterranean for free Fridays. It's like going to music college, but with a tuition that makes all kinds of sense. Plus, our entire Patreon archive is yours. Discograffiti's Top 10, our Buried Treasure show, Rock Cousteau, our Slag Off show, Queasy Listening, and the Private Press with Paul Major. And all that for the price of only a cup of coffee a week. Times are tough, you say? Fret not, because there's a $1 tier. Or you could just join as a basic member and buy episodes piecemeal from our Patreon shop. Don't risk feeling badly about yourself by not giving. Check out patreon.com/discograffiti to find the tier that's right for you. Once again, that's patreon.com/discograffiti. What was your drug of choice? Do you mind me asking?
Oh, back in those days, probably speed and booze.
Okay.
Later on, I discovered some of the other Garden of Earthly Delights that were harder to kick, but not impossible.
Yeah, up or down?
Down.
Down, got it.
But you can't go down unless you go up too. I mean, you got to do it all.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, why limit yourself?
I got to tell you, cocaine always made me nervous, but
that's why you need heroin.
Right, exactly. But I could tell by Jefferson Starship's output that it didn't make Cantner nervous.
I think when Paul had that brain embolism, I don't think he did cocaine anymore after that.
But that was late in the game, wasn't it?
You know something? The simple answer is I really don't know because we weren't hanging out back then.
Okay.
But I only know what I heard from other people, so it's hard to say. But I don't know. I mean, we get into a discussion about drugs in general and a drug like cocaine in particular. It's like thinking back, what was even desirable about it?
Yeah. And I'm so curious about not only your own music, but your viewpoints on the music of Jefferson Airplane and the music of the Starship, because it seems so oppositional to the place that you represent in music, which is, try at least attempting to connect with an authenticity. And right. When I hear the Starship's music, what I'm hearing is cocaine.
Could be. I mean, I can't comment on that. But what you hear what I hear with the Starship's music, without getting into the music per se, is they're part of a very successful marketing machine. And I'm not critical of this. None of us want to be quote unquote unpopular. But I would like to think that and I'm not even saying that the folks played the Starship sold out, because what does that mean? It just wasn't my thing. It wasn't my thing.
You know what? Honestly, it's fascinating. There's a line that you wrote in the Song for the North Star. The love we wanted was lost in lies.
Yeah.
And, when I hear that line, what I think is, I just think about the perils of having all these highfalutin ideals that you then have to live. Because back then, you couldn't just write a song. Because if you didn't live like that, you were copping out. So,
No, you're right.
Right?
And I think it's important, as an overview of this conversation, to remember that we were all young back in those days.
Sure.
And now I was in my mid-20s, which is not technically as young as some people get in the music business, but certainly emotionally, I was a very young person at that time. And when the Airplane got together, I think that we had all these disparate characters. Marty was certainly a very much different kind of an artist than I was and stuff like that. Jack and I were buddies, but we came from different sides of the street also before we started to play together in the band, because he'd been playing in like rhythm and blues and show bands and stuff like that. The point is that all these disparate characters got together and respected each other. Not that we didn't fight and argue about a bunch of shit, because we did, but at the end of the day, we respected each other's artistry. I wasn't a prolific songwriter back then, but every time I wrote a song, I got it on the album. Now, in bands that have a lot of people, usually there's one or two songwriters. It's just like that joke, the drummer's last J on the job. When are they going to start doing my songs? It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. If I came up with a song, we did the song.
Yeah. I mean, in that way, you guys were almost like a collective.
Yes. We were an artistic collective. That's very well put.
But then, the splintering contingents, when I see the Airplane hitting the 1970s, man, there's some painful growth things that happen, because first Spencer leaves, and then maybe if you did have an active 1970, it was just playing because you didn't release anything.
Right.
But the Tuna comes to be, and Grace and Paul start radicalizing in a way that I got to assume has to be uncomfortable for you and Jack.
Yeah, hindsight's 2020, as we've mentioned several times already, but at the time, I just didn't feel for myself. I'm not critical of people having opinions. Opinions are a good thing to have. But I don't think that I felt qualified to weigh in on society in the way that they did, which is not to be critical of what they did. The other thing, too, is I think that as a group, we aged out. We weren't kids when we got in the band. So like Grace and Paul had a kid, people are starting to get older. We no longer, in the beginning, sometimes we bunked together. Sometimes the whole band would couch surf and live in people's houses. We didn't have that kind of bond anymore. And I think as times moved on, that sort of dissipated. And I think for myself, that's one of the things that held the creativity of the band together. I remember towards the end of the last recordings of Wally Hyder, we were rarely in the studio together at the same time. And I'm glad you mentioned Spencer too, because in hindsight, Spencer was the most creative drummer that we had. He was awesome.
Yeah.
But as we started becoming more bombastic with our stage performances, he was physically unable to do what we thought we were looking for at that time.
And Joey is a sledgehammer.
Joey's a sledgehammer, absolutely. Great rock drummer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great rock drummer, yeah.
Yeah. You know what I love about you guys as well? One of the many, many things, because, man, when I tell you that I have a weak spot for the Airplane, I really, really mean that, is that the way that you approached or responded to your success was incredible to me. I just can't get over the fact that after Surrealistic Pillow, which is, I would assume you would agree, is the poppiest record to which you ever contributed.
Oh, absolutely.
You countered that with After Bathing at Baxter's, which that takes balls. And that reminds me of Robert Altman. After MASH was a big success, he released a movie called Brewster McCloud, which is just batshit crazy. Anyone who does something like that immediately gets my attention.
Because Surrealistic Pillow, the first Airplane album takes off as a folk rock album.
It's a great folk rock record.
It is a great folk rock album. Surrealistic Pillow is a rock and roll album, but it's soft rock in a lot of ways, but also not in a lot of ways. It's an eclectic record. Very successful, obviously. It was on the charts for 2 years and gave us the power to really pretty much do whatever we wanted. So we had a blank check when we went in to do Baxter's. Remember, Surrealistic Pillow, I think it only took like 11 or 12 days to record. Baxter's, it's at least 6 months and maybe more. I can't remember, And, we got a chance, Sgt. Pepper's came out. The Beatles opened a lot of doors for our creative thinking. And we wound up spending a lot of time in the studio and doing a lot of stuff. Baxter's an interesting album.
I love that record, man. I mean, Wild Time, Martha, some of the best. It's about Martha Wax, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's who Skip ran away to Mexico with when he got fired.
As I recall.
But yeah, I mean, some of the stuff on that record, if you didn't live through the 60s.
He didn't get fired until he ran away to Mexico.
Right.
He just up and disappeared. First things first.
You know, I'm curious. I know you visited Skip in Bellevue.
I did.
Do you remember any of what that was like? Because I know it's talked about very briefly in Cam's book. What was that visit like?
Very uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. There's this gal that was kind of like sort of looking out for him. I think her name was Eileen from Brooklyn. I forget what her name is. Met her years later. She wound up being a school teacher when she grew up. But, Skip, man, it's just a sad case. I mean, I don't want to start diagnosing people because I'm not a doctor. I suspect we'd consider him to be bipolar today. But who knows, you know? Just a sensitive, wonderful guy that, for better or worse, was batshit crazy.
Yeah. But I mean, there's a few telltale signs that you're a very good friend. I mean, I bet that there were not a lot of visits to Bellevue. In addition, you paid for Billy Dean Andrus's funeral.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, friendship means a lot to me. And I'm not saying that I haven't probably hurt people's feelings over the years, and because that's life, but I try not to do that. That whole scene before the rock and roll thing happened in San Francisco, that scene in San Jose and Santa Cruz and all that kind of stuff like that, I mean, that was the world to us in that time, and all those people were important. And I was probably one of the first of that group to quote unquote make it. But we try not to forget where we came from. And we had a chance to help people out. We did what we could.
Yeah. Something tells me as time has gone on, you think of those days more and more, don't you?
Yeah, you do. And you realize that's, again, it's a time that'll never be replicated. But one of the important things, and you can't forget this, is we were all young back then, you know? Yeah. I'm so fortunate that I continue to be able to make friends as time goes on. But the ones that you grew up with, that's a different story.
Now, looking back at that work, because I know my favorite album that you've ever done is Qua.
And okay. the way that got named is funny. You know, that's in an era of funny band names and all that stuff. I was driving down the Market Street Hill in San Francisco. I was going to town to do something, and you know, you get down the hill and there are all those trolley tracks and stuff like that before you come to Van Ness Avenue. And there used to be a martial arts dojo, and Mickey Hart was a big martial arts guy back in those days. And I'm driving along, and I pull up to the stoplight, and I stop, and I look to my right, and there's this, it's like a storefront, a glass window, and there's a bunch of guys wearing whatever the martial arts guys call those things they wear, and there's Mickey Hart. And as I'm looking at that, he does this thing, and he breaks a pile of bricks or boards, I forget what, and you can't hear it, but I can see him, and in my mind, the sound that he made when he did that was Qua! and so when we were thinking about putting the album together, again, there was an era of funny titles and stuff like that. It just made sense to me at the time.
That's so funny, because what I read was that the actual meaning of Qua is like an accumulation of all the great things that there are.
I had no idea.
That's hysterical. You know, I have a billion questions to ask you, but instead, let me just jump to sobriety, okay? So sure. I'm curious, first of all, what your favorite record you've ever been a part of is, if you have one.
Favorite record, meaning like recording?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm not sure that I have a favorite, but I think two records that mean a lot to me. You know, I've been lucky because I've never recorded something go, wow, I hate that, it really sucks. I would have to say Surrealistic Pillow and Qua. Now, I got to throw the first Hot Tuna record in there, too.
The live one?
Yeah, the live one, yeah.
Okay. That's awesome. And then, is there a record that is so redolent of your ripping and running days that you can barely stomach going back to listening to it?
Well, I don't have a problem listening to it. I just don't play and think that way anymore. Yeah, that's some fun stuff. Let me think. I would probably say, I'm going to say Phosphorescent Rat.
All the way back then is when you were crazy on drugs?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a long time ago, too.
It is.
Damn. So the 90s must have been,
I got sober in 96.
Right.
I started in 93, but I didn't get the memo until 96.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard.
It is. And you know, and by that time, you know, back in the day, I didn't know anything about, quote unquote, the real hard drugs like heroin and stuff like that. I mean, the first time we ever discovered cocaine, Owsley turned us on to it at Monterey. Thanks, Owsley. I didn't have to take it. I'm not blaming him, So
imagine Owsley turning you on to drugs. That doesn't make sense.
Oh my God.
So did you have, mythologies tied up in your head about what creativity was going to be like without drugs or alcohol?
No, I think that when I got sober, that's the first time I really thought about my life as a whole and what made things work. Because I'd been, an alcoholic and addict for a really, really long time. I had my first drink when I was 11 or 12. And looking back at it now, even though I didn't drink all the time back then, I had all the symptoms when I did drink of being an alcoholic. So that was the deal. So to think about being able to live life in general, much less be creative and interactive with other human beings, that took me a while to wrap my head around. And I was very fortunate that we have a very strong AA community in Southeast Ohio where I live. And
I was going to ask you, are you AA or NA?
I am AA.
Okay.
It just made more sense to me because I started with alcohol and I ended with alcohol. But hey, however you address your problem, I personally have nothing but good things to say about the 12-step groups I've been a part of. I mean, if I was in another city, for example, and one of my friends says, you want to go to a meeting and he was in NA, I'd go. I have no problem with that.
And I know, by the way, that you have kind of extensive experience in trying to find pain relief with CBD, and you have your own CBD line, don't you?
I do. CBD doesn't work for everybody.
Right. But
I'm fortunate that it works for me. For example, when I'm on the road, I use the CBD cream in my hands, stuff. I have a little arthritis. And so far, it seems to do the job.
Nice. So before we jump here, Tuna's still going, right? This is 56 years now?
Oh, yeah. I'd have to do the math. Easily. Yes, absolutely. Hudson is still going. Jack and I, we were out earlier this year, and we will be out. We're doing a long tour this fall. On the East Coast, by the way.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Are you coming through New Jersey?
I would have to do the same thing I'm going to ask you to do, is just go to my website.
I will.
jormakaukonen.com. I never pay attention to this stuff. I know I'm going to Pittsburgh tomorrow, but other than that, I haven't even looked at my itinerary yet.
Was your only argument with Jack Casady in the late 70s? Was that the only time you guys were at serious loggerheads?
If we had Jack here as a part of this conversation, it would be that's something you should look into. That'd be a lot of fun. But Jack and I are different guys, and we've disagreed about stuff. But I honestly don't remember ever seriously being at loggerheads with him.
Whatever the disagreement was in '77 when you guys split up temporarily.
Oh no, actually, I think that what happened then. That wasn't a disagreement with us. My ex-wife, may she rest in peace, had a hyperactive thyroid, and she was literally going insane. And it was the only thing that I could deal with at the time. Now, had I to do it over again, because I just stopped showing up. That was the way I approached things at the time.
Right.
Because I've learned something over the years. Had I do it over again, I look, Jack, I've got some serious problems. It's not your fault. I got to deal with this.
Right.
But no, we didn't split because I had problems with him.
Okay.
I had to take care of Margareta.
Well, I know you got a lot to do here. I just got to say that you're really a hero of mine. When I think of everything you've gone through and the fact that you've, been clean and sober for so long, and, the depth of your spirit, it shines through everything you do. You do walk it like you talk it, and you don't cop out from the things that you've written.
Well, Jack's been sober longer than me. I think he's got 35 years now.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Listen, to be continued. You know how to get a hold of me.
I will definitely be in touch.
We can continue this conversation down the road sometime.
Would you mind reaching out to Jack?
I can tell you without me doing that, he'd be on board with this too.
Okay.
All right, man, listen, got to load the bus. 1 minute you're a rock star, and the next minute you're schlepping a bunch of heavy stuff.
Next you're a roadie.
Yeah, exactly. All right, my brother.
I'll see you soon, Jorma. Thank you so much, man.
Good talking to you.
All right, that about does it. A heartfelt Discograffiti thanks goes out to my beautiful wife and son, Jen and Mason, Rudy Fishman, Becky Boyd, Jay Schultz, Bespoke LA, my mom, my dad, my incredibly loyal fans, and especially the entire Patreon community, the Soldiers of Sound. I love every last one of you, and this show would not exist without you, my friends. And so, don't let our youth go to waste, lads and ladies. It's Discograffiti!